full house today. I want to welcome everyone to Parent Forum number 5, English version. My name is Charlene Margot, and I'm the founder of the Parent Education Series and co-founder of our new nonprofit organization, the Parent Venture. We are so delighted to see you all here today. Happy Friday, happy December 11th. We have a great program for you. So before I get started, I want to begin by saying clearly, how to give advice your child might listen to was a very popular topic. We have been developing the Parent Forum as online support groups. When we envisioned this idea, thank you, Sequoia Healthcare District and Dr. Karen Lee, we were thinking about real in-person discussion groups. Needless to say, last March, everything changed. So we've been running these as online events, and the audience started out with 20, 25 people, and today we had almost 200 register. And we didn't want to keep it to a really small group. That just didn't seem fair. So we're going to run a big meeting today, but what we're going to do differently is at the end of the hour, some of you will need to log off, but Dr. Mcgann has offered to stay on for a little after party. So we'll have some more time together if you have questions after this hour session. Okay, so let me again say thank you to the Sequoia Healthcare District for sponsoring this event. Without them, this would not be possible, and to the nonprofit, the Parent Venture. Again, we know this is a timely topic. Many of you have heard Dr. Mcgann speak about parent-child communication, lots of learning about listening and reflective listening, but today we're actually going to be talking about when you parents get to talk, and that's important. So we're excited for today. Just very briefly, because we'll talk about this more before we have Q&A. Today's format is going to be that Dr. Mcgann is going to offer 15, 20 minutes of didactic teaching content, and then we are going to have questions from you, the audience. We would like it if you would put your questions in the Q&A box. Eran will tell you more about that later. He'll follow up with you live to clarify a question or ask for more information. Also, my partner, Bev Hartman, is monitoring the chat. So do look for resources in the chat. She'll be putting in links to this organization, other things that are of interest today. And please feel free to talk to us, talk to each other. We want this to be an interactive meeting as much as possible. Let's see. Eran, do you have anything else to add before I introduce you?
I'm not sure, because this is a meeting format Zoom, I'm not sure there is a Q&A feature. I think we might only have chat. So maybe.
Thank you. Good clarification. He is absolutely correct. We typically offer webinars, so you will be putting your questions in the chat. Good one. Thank you. Okay. So if you have questions that come in as you're thinking, you can add them now, or you can add them when Eran starts talking. We have a few questions that have come in earlier, so we'll be ready to get the conversation started. All right. Let me tell you a little bit about our keynote presenter today, Dr. Eran Magen. Earned his master's in education and PhD in psychology from Stanford University, and he completed his postdoctoral training in population health at the University of Pennsylvania. Dr. Magen served as the research director for the University of Pennsylvania's Department of Counseling and Psychological Services before founding the Center for Supportive Relationships. Dr. Magen works with public school districts, universities, hospitals, and private corporations, where he teaches educators, clinicians, managers, and parents how to build stronger, more joyful relationships in their professional and personal lives. Dr. Mcgann's work has been published in top-tier scientific journals, including Psychological Science, Emotion, and Academic Pediatrics. And he's been cited in popular media outlets varying from Allure magazine to Psychology Today. Take it away, Eran.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much, Charlene. Thanks again for the opportunity to meet and talk with lots of interesting people. Before I start, I want to encourage as many people as possible to switch on their video if you are in the mood. I think it's just, I mean, certainly it's nice for me to see people reacting and to know when to speed up and when to slow down. But also it might be fun for you to see each other, right? We're part of a community. Wow, this worked. At least 2 more people. Hello, everybody. This is very nice. So as I talk, feel free to use your, Zoom choice for who to look at. You don't have to look at me. You don't have to look at the slides. Look at whoever you want. And I always wish Zoom told me who's looking at me so I know when to pick my nose and when not, but I don't. So, assume that you are on camera. Okay, let me start. Oh, I see a child walking behind. Can also look. All right. Can we see this? Yes, Charlene.
Yes.
Good. Okay. Okay, Cynthia can as well. Excellent. So, how to give advice that your child might listen to. This same slide is going to show at the very end, so don't feel like you have to write stuff super quick. Nevertheless, if you want the PDF of the slides that are here, then that's the URL, but you'll see it at the end too. Okay, so I talked about...
All of a sudden, I can't see the slide.
You're not able to see it anymore?
I did. Do others of you see it?
Sharing is paused. Okay, hold on.
Black.
How about... Sharing was forced paused. Hold on. Let me try to stop the share and restart. Yeah, I got a thing that says sharing is paused. Okay. Pardon us. Zoom adventures. Any better?
There we are.
Are we still in introductions?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm just going to try to touch as little of my laptop as possible while I go through this. Okay, so really brief orientation. In general, the way that I think about interactions that people have with people, including parents with kids, I think about the amount of emotional charge or emotional intensity that's going on. And if it's pretty low and nobody's upset and it's just kind of every day, it's kind of a green zone. And that's when we focus on building relationships and building goodwill and digging the well and all that. And if somebody's kind of upset, you know, going through something that's kind of yellow zone, and that's when we support one another and try to do good things. And if people are very, very upset, then it's potentially a crisis, and that's when we do crisis intervention. The red zone is really different from the others because in the red we focus on safety explicitly at the potential expense of the relationship, right? Whereas in the green and yellow, we don't really need to worry much about safety. As long as we're not, you know, pushing the swing too hard, it's going to be okay. And we focus on the relationship. So today, we're talking about giving advice, which usually happens when somebody is going through some kind of a dilemma or problem. Sometimes they're upset about it, sometimes they're not. And you just feel inspired to go and tell them what to do, even though everything is basically okay as far as they're concerned. So another framework orientation, this idea of the relational bank account, which will come into play. The idea is that we all have some sort of a relational bank account with everybody else, including you with your kids. And the account balance reflects the amount of goodwill that exists in the relationship. And so the more goodwill exists in a relationship, the more the other person trusts you, is honest with you, is vulnerable with you, will put effort into requests that you make, will forgive you when you're wrong or make mistakes, and so on. So this is relevant here because the higher the account balance, right, the more goodwill your child has toward you, the more likely your child is to first listen to and then possibly actually implement in good faith your suggestion, right? So we're going to spend collectively a couple of minutes thinking about how to build goodwill prior to giving advice, ideally long before, not just before, because they can see it coming. What builds goodwill? So big picture, the things that build goodwill are when you show your child that you care about him or her, or that you respect him or her. There are many, many different ways you can show this care and respect. Respect includes things like respecting their autonomy, respecting their intelligence, their ability to make decisions, caring about, you know, their schedule and their priorities, things like that. That all falls broadly under respect, whereas care is things like, you know, taking their comfort into consideration, showing, again, orienting to their priorities and just being generally warm and nice. So these things build goodwill, whereas things that take away from goodwill is when you show the opposite of that, right? If you clearly don't care about what they care about or their comfort, or don't consider their opinion noteworthy. Also, when you ask them to inconvenience themselves for you, that's a withdrawal, and it's okay. This is a totally normal withdrawal.
What?
I just found out the Tyrannosaurus rex and this
The ventriloquism act.
relate to each other, and they're actually distant cousins of the chicken.
Wow.
It's not just a joke.
So
They're actually distant.
there we go. So inconveniencing, when you ask someone to do something for you, for example, ask your child to do something for you that they would not normally do spontaneously, that's a withdrawal. And it's okay, it's a fair thing to do. This happens in relationships. We do things for each other all the time. But we want to be mindful of the fact that this is a withdrawal. And if we do this enough without replenishing the relational goodwill, eventually the other person will say, no, I don't want to, right? Because you're asking too much and you're not giving enough. The reason this is all relevant here is because giving advice in and of itself is a withdrawal. If you can orient to giving advice like that, you're going to get pretty far. So it's a withdrawal because you're asking them to do a few things. One is to just listen to you talk for a while and reason your way through things, which in some contexts may not be fun for them or for some people. But the other is because really you're asking them to do something that probably would not be the first thing that they would want to do automatically. Otherwise, you wouldn't be giving this advice, right? You're trying to get them to change their trajectory a little bit. Again, it's fine. You have good ideas, you have good suggestions, and obviously, your primary thing you're thinking about is their best interest. But it's a withdrawal. So how do you make it more likely that this will carry through? So one is make it the smallest withdrawal possible, and the other is follow up with immediate deposits, right? So the relational account remains high and they're feeling cooperative. So a little bit more specific. How to make withdrawals smaller. So one thing that you can do is you can clarify the desired outcome. This sounds very cold actually, but what I mean is if you can say consult with them, maybe I should say consult instead of clarify, consult about the desired outcome, right? Their opinion matters. So if you want to talk to them about, I don't know, their passing technique when they're playing soccer and you want to say, oh, try this angle with your foot instead of that angle, don't start with, hey, try doing it like this. You could start with, do you feel, would you want to pass more accurately, when you're passing really far? And they're like, yeah, awesome. Now you're in lead, right? And this can extend to everything, right? About timing, when to do homework, figuring out, their own productivity habits, and if you want to help them with their cooking skills or with their pirouettes on ice skating or whatever, anything at all. Check with them about what is the outcome that we're aiming for, rather than assuming that the outcome you're aiming for is the one that they want. Even if it's one and the same, it's just nice to be explicit about it so they know that you are trying to help them with their goal. Respect their intelligence, right? You ask for their opinion. How do you think you could get there? What are possibilities? What have you tried before? What have you thought about? Show humility. Your solution may not be the right one, and if you can be explicit about it with them, it's much easier to have a conversation and become a team when the other person says, let's think about this. I think this could work. What do you think? As opposed to, this is going to work, just do it. Because when you say this is going to work, just do it, best case scenario, you're right, and they might do it, but it might also be the case that they say, well, clearly you're not interested in my opinion, so I'll just say, sure, okay, and I'll walk away and not do it, right? You want them telling you if something is not sounding right to them so you can workshop it together. So say, look, I don't know everything about this, but this is my opinion. This is my recommendation, maybe strong recommendation. What do you think? Is this going to work? Is it? And actually be humble about it, right? When they tell you it's not going to work for some reason, or if they add details that you didn't realize before, that then change your recommendation, like be open to that stuff. You don't know everything about your kid. You know your kid very well, maybe the best out of anybody, including your kid, possibly. But still, you don't know everything, and if your kid can give you more information, then take it, incorporate it, use it. And the last point is a way to reduce the withdrawal, the amount of credit you're requesting from your child when you're giving advice, is suggest experiments rather than laying down laws or absolute truths, right? Say, let's try this and see what happens, right? A lot of people are into experiment. They're willing to try and see how it goes. And again, it projects humility. You say, let's see how this goes. Let's try it. If it doesn't work, then I'll back off. We don't have to, right? But let's give it a try, as opposed to this is how we do it from now until forever. So these are all ways to reduce the extent of the withdrawal you're making by giving advice. Some ways to make immediate deposits, right? Ask for permission before you start giving advice. Is this a good time? Hey, I have an idea. Do you want to hear? Things like that, right? This reminds me of a story from when I was your age, and it snowed all the time. Do you want to hear? And then, they'll probably say yes, but they might not. And when they say not, you respect that, right? But when you ask for permission and they say yes, that's a serious deposit. You're really respecting their autonomy. They have some control over their time and what enters their ears and when. That's a nice thing. So again, clarify the desired outcome here. I mean it differently. I will change the text later on to, with the withdrawal, it's consult about desired outcome. In the deposit section, it's be really explicit. This connects with the next point about articulating your goodwill. So be really explicit about what's the reason you're giving this advice, right? Like take a second and say, I know that you love soccer and I've seen you be frustrated when it kind of goes wide, and I just want to see you happy a lot, even after you're passing long distances, right? Like I think you can really shine in this. And so I just have some ideas, right? But this is the only reason I'm saying this, because I want you happier doing this. Or because you might say, because I think this is really important to you and I want to see you succeeding in this thing, right? Because I know that this is really satisfying. Whatever it is, just like take a minute to articulate it. I know that it's weird. I think especially as parents, our goodwill is so obvious to us. It's shocking to think that our child may not spend his entire day thinking, Dad wants the best for me, Dad wants the best for me, but they might not. This is not necessarily the internal dialogue in their head, right? So it's just nice to remind them. Say like, I really love you so much and I want to see you happy, and I think this is something you care about a lot. And so here's a way that I think we can make it better. That's it, right? 10 seconds. Big deposit. Again, respecting their intelligence. Ask them, what do you think? How would you go about it? Right? What have you tried before? How do you think it went? Right? The more you can consult and the less you can manage, better relationally. We don't know, might not be that they consulting alone may not set them on a better path short term, although long term, they're certainly going to learn a lot about how to think about problems and how to approach them and how to assess the effectiveness of what they do and so on. But spend some time consulting. Ask them how, again, what they've done in the past, how that went, what they think, brainstorm together. And as much as possible, allow autonomy, right? Your advice is advice. It's not an order, right? So sometimes, right, there have to be clear lines and it's not negotiable. But as much as possible, make it negotiable and make it explicitly negotiable, right? This is my opinion. This is my advice. What do you think? You don't want to do it? Okay, I guess that's an experiment too, right? And it's linking back to this idea of we run experiments and we look at results and then we talk about it. So these are some ways to think about how to make smaller deposits and how smaller withdrawals and then immediate deposits around this issue of advice giving. Now, if giving advice is a withdrawal, it's worth noting that giving unsolicited advice is a very big withdrawal, right? Very few of us like getting advice when we don't want it. So be very mindful. If you do find yourself in the unenviable position of mid-sentence realizing you're giving advice without anybody having wanted it, then make it the smallest withdrawal possible and then follow up with as much deposits as possible, right? We'll talk a little bit about timing for unsolicited advice, but you can avoid this whole unsolicited advice thing by just developing the habit of asking for permission before giving advice. Just do it for a couple of weeks until it becomes reflex. We're like, hey, I have an idea. Do you want to hear? And if they say no, then you decide, are you going to transgress? And be extremely picky about when you cross the line that your child or anybody raised. Okay, so work on your timing. That's very important. How to give advice so that it's the most solicited advice possible. When your child is upset and has a problem, of course, the first thing you want to do, most of us, is solve their problem so that they can be less upset. But it's not quite the right sequence. You have to make them less upset so that they can hear what you have to say about their problem. right? Solving the problem is not going to make them less upset in and of itself. So basically, when somebody has this very high level of emotional charge, they're full. There's so much going on. Just the emotion is so distracting. They can't hear anything you have to say. They can't process new information. They can't change their perspective. They're just upset right now. And so if you notice that your child is upset, your job is to help them be less upset, bring down their charge until they're calm and can process things, right? So at the very top is not a good place to give advice, right? You do different things at the very top. Caroline is like all into this. I see that. Thank you. This is great. Is it Caroline or Carolyn? How do you line? Okay. So this is part of a separate workshop, and there are recordings of this that I bet either Beverly or Charlene can put the link to. But these are broadly the stages that you can follow when you're trying to help your child or anybody be less upset. This idea is that you get really present and then you help them release the charge by doing really good listening for a long time until they're less upset. And only when they're done being upset, you get ready to give advice. You see it at the bottom there, right? You ask for permission, you give your advice, you admit your ignorance, being humble, and so on. I'll break it down a tiny bit, but we're not going to go in depth into this right now because there's a whole, like I said, separate workshop on this. But I won't talk about, eye contact and body language and all of this. I'll just say put away your phones when your kid's upset and pay attention to your kid. Once you have put away your phone, your main job is to essentially bear witness, but in a warm and caring way to whatever your child is going through. So the only question that's important to hold in your head is after, are you safe? So assuming your child is safe, the only important question is, what is your experience like? And you're constantly trying to tell your child the experience that you are understanding your child to be having, sometimes in question form, and then have your child correct or confirm. And your child will automatically add more detail because when people are upset, they want to talk about whatever's upsetting for them, right? That's how we work. So basically, you see that your child's upset, you say, what's going on? And they say, Carrie stole my bike, and smashed it. And you say, so you're upset about Carrie stealing the bike? And they're like, yeah, I can't ride it anymore because, it's just totally ruined. You're like, oh, okay, so you're upset because you can't ride the bike anymore. And you're like, yeah, I was planning on taking it on this big trip with all of my friends and da-da-da, and, and I'm worried that Drew doesn't, like me anymore anyway because I can never go when everybody's available. Like the thing unfolds and you're constantly paraphrasing. So that's the WIG. WIG is an acronym for what I got. It's a paraphrase. It's just a smaller word, which I'm a fan of smaller words. So they talk and you WIG and they get less upset every time. So basically the way that it works is, you ready, Charlene? I made a new animation of this. Here we go. So they're upset and they tell you their story. And so you WIG it back at them and they go, yeah, exactly. And then they get a little less charged. And they talk about what they're thinking about and you paraphrase that. And they go, yes, exactly. And you're there and you're getting them and it's amazing and they feel less upset. And it just repeats, until they get less upset. And eventually they basically stop talking. They just go, yeah, you're right. You got what I'm saying. Yes. And they no longer look upset. And this works from, this is essentially what you do in therapy with people who are officially grown-ups. And this is what I do with, when my son was 2 years old and he would ride on his tricycle super fast and then try to take a spin, turn too fast, and he would take a spill on the floor and I'd run over and I'd check if all his teeth are still there. And then I would say, what happened? He's upset. And I would say, oh, did you fall down? Which is me paraphrasing the situation essentially, right? I'm not giving advice. I'm not being like, oh, you should do this more. Just like, did you fall down? He's like, yeah, I fell down. And then we go, I'm looking at where it happened. And then we go there and I mime it. I said, so were you riding here? And then you fell down and hit your face, boom, on the floor. And then he's like, yeah, I hit my face. We're kind of talking about it until he knows that I get what he's been through. And at some point, he's just not upset. Either he's distracted or he thinks it's funny when I pretend to fall on the floor. But my point is, this works from like 2 years old to 90 years old. It's all the same. If we're upset, we want somebody to get us. And the way that we know somebody gets us is because they tell us our experience. Pretty simple. So the green dot is where you consider giving advice, not any of the red dots. That's the main point for this particular session, okay? That's the timing. So once you think that they might be green, you ask, hey, you want to hear stories from back when the world was a frozen tundra? And they say, sure. Or you say, hey, can I give you a piece of advice? Or do you... That's when you start doing it, okay? So that's a point about timing. General summary, because we're already closing, because it's supposed to be short. Be mindful of your timing. I just spent a while talking about this, so I'll spare you the repeat. Definitely not while they're actively upset, and rarely if they didn't ask for advice. If you really want to give advice they didn't ask for permission before you do it. Minimize withdrawals. Any advice giving is a withdrawal. Minimize your withdrawals and make as many deposits as possible in the relationship in general, but certainly if you're about to or just did give advice. Be respectful of boundaries that they pose. Be respectful of their intelligence. Ask them what they thought about. Consult with them as much as possible. Tell them, not just show them, tell them that you care and why you're giving this advice. Explain your motivation. I don't think they suspect ulterior motives per se. Maybe between 13 and 17 they do. But regardless of ulterior motives, they may not spend time thinking about how much you want them to be well, right? And just remind them. Invite a discussion about whatever it is rather than, giving them orders. And if they say no, accept no. And if they say not now, accept not now, as much as you can, unless there's a really good reason not to. Suggest experiments. That's worth its own point. It's a totally different thing when you say, you should really do this. And when you say, I think this could be a lot better if you did that. What do you think? How about we try doing that now or for the next couple of weeks or whatever, right? And I might be wrong or I might be right, and we'll see. And very importantly, this is a point that I made up basically just for me, but maybe there's more of me out there. If you successfully gave a piece of advice and they seem to be accepting it, stop. Right? There's a double principle here. One is once you've made the sale, stop selling. The other is do not be tempted to start giving advice on a bunch of other things just because this one went well. Right? Because you're basically asking for a second mortgage immediately after your first one was approved. Right? Just give it some time, build some more credit, pick your battles, go slow, right? Okay, you get all this. I see at least 3 people nodding, and that's good enough for me. So that's that. Before we switch to the Q&A, this is my newsletter. Kindly click the thing and join, or type in the thing and join. EranMcgann.com/join. It's amazingly fun, as much as getting written word can be fun. And then I did want to spend a second talking about the masterclass. So this is something that I just recently started. We're finishing our first cycle this week and starting a different one longer than we did before. This one was 4 weeks and realized it's not enough time. So we're doing a 7-class session, very small, lots of practice and lots of discussion and didactics, sent to you midweek, and then we meet as a small group and practice and discuss. I think it's great. Maybe you will too. So it's at eranmcgann.com/masterclass. Check it out. There are no-cost options for people for whom money is a problem. I'm very committed to making this kind of stuff available for people regardless of financial ability. So if you can pay for it, that's wonderful, and you will. But if you say that you can't, I'm not going to verify anything. If you feel like you can for whatever reason and you just tell me that, really no questions asked, and you'll take it for free. So it's just a question of whether you have the time. So that's that. And then this is the title slide that I promised. I'll keep it on for a little bit. For those of you who want to download the PDF of this slide, you just go to the URL at the bottom, which kind of ironically for today ends up being get advice, but usually is get and then the name of whatever the workshop is. So it's eranmcgann.com/get/advice. So that concludes the presentation portion. I don't know did any comments or questions come in the meantime, Charlene?
Well, we have a few things. And first of all, I just want to say thank you so much, Iran. People always appreciate hearing from you. We always learn stuff. And I wanted to just say I have known Iran, how many years now? 5 years at least, maybe?
5, yeah, going on 6, yeah.
Yeah, going on 6. So I have used his advice with my grown children who are literally 30 and 34, and it works. Just got a note from Dr. Karen Lee from the Clay Healthcare District, used it with her adult son yesterday. It works. People want to be listened to. And this idea of making regular deposits so that when you do have a chance to give advice, you have a full bank account is just brilliant. And also I love that advice about stop selling when you've made the deal. It's like on Shark Tank, when you get the offer from Mark Cuban, you leave the room. You don't have anything else to say, right?
This is me saving you 12 years of my life. Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, here's a question that is on many parents' minds. Let's see what you say. Whenever I try to open a conversation with my teen, he says, "Not now, Mom," and goes to his room. Any suggestions? I feel shut out of conversation with him.
That's a good one. Okay, so it's never a good time to talk right now. So I'll give it a try, but the person who asked is very welcome to follow up and tell me the details that I'm missing about this. So I'm thinking two things immediately. One is maybe it really is not a good time, and maybe it's possible to decide on a time in advance to talk about something. I know it sounds kind of simplistic, and I would not suggest when he says not now to say, okay, when? Because already it starts feeling a little, tense. But maybe at a time when everybody's calmer, right? If you do have dinner sometimes together, or you do have some activities together. So not sneaking up on giving advice, but rather, you kind of pass the mashed potatoes, and then you say, oh, by the way, I still have some thoughts about, the situation with the team. When would be a good time for us to talk about it?
Just went to the
You know,
toilet
this
once
feels
on
very-
Zoom. I didn't even know.
So maybe at a time when he is calmer and the connection is stronger, not to try to use that as a time to give advice, but as a time to set a time to give advice. Or he might say, now is good, right? So that's nice. That's one option. Another, I guess, is, this is almost always just an automatic question that I have is, maybe it's worth, excuse me, maybe it's worth really just thinking about the relational account balance, right? Like, are there other things that could be done just to build the goodwill in the relationship to a point where he is saying, I really want to hear what you have to say, which I realize may be total science fiction for some people in some households. And I don't mean, in saying this, I don't mean that you're not doing enough for your son, or, that you don't care enough about him or anything like that, but he may need to see or experience it in different ways. And sometimes, when we do this really in depth with parents, doing a relational analysis with their kids, sometimes parents are surprised when they start thinking about themselves from the viewpoint of the child and realizing how much of their care isn't seen by their kid. And there are ways to do more things that the child can process and understand. So that's kind of first thoughts, but I'm also very happy to hear a little more detail from the person that posted the question originally.
So Iran, there are attendees. Here's Betty asking for some more clarification. How do you do this with teens who reject your deposits and won't engage?
Yeah. So if somebody rejected a wonderful gift that you're giving them, it is likely the case that you think it's a wonderful gift, but the other person doesn't. Right? It's almost kind of like a closed circuit argument. So people take what they want, or people receive what they want quite happily, right? But sometimes we try to give people things that they don't want because we're just convinced that they will want them. And then when they don't, it just seems completely off. And it can be sometimes ridiculous stuff, right? Like, you can make this truly delicious meal that 100% of the people in the world would agree is delicious, and you serve it to your starving child, and your starving child says, I don't want this. And it's just mind-blowing, right? But it may be that for this particular child, it feels really, I don't know, your child really wanted to cook and not to be served food, right? And it's such an important issue for your child at that very moment that they won't. So you thought that you were giving them this thing that they would really appreciate, but they don't. And so I think I would, again, need more details. I'll give you an example from a different parent that is probably very different from what's going on for Betty, who asked this question. So again, I'm not implying anything, but this is an example of a parent who was trying to make a lot of deposits for his child, and again, just rebuffed basically, or sometimes actually met with a lot of animosity when trying to give these deposits. And what turned out eventually was that there was a level of trust missing in the relationship, like at a pretty core level, so that there was just mistrust in terms of like, what does it mean when you're nice to me? Like all the way there, right? And so that's a very tricky situation, right? And this is what I was referring to about the, kids probably don't think you have ulterior motives, but sometimes do, for whatever reason, right? Do they think that you're trying to get them to do something? Or so there was something missing even underneath to make it possible to have this goodwill exchange. Again, I'm not saying that this is what's happening in this particular case, but the general question then is, how do they perceive it? Because if they're not receiving it, then probably they're not perceiving it as a deposit. Okay.
All right, so Iran, here's a really good question from Julia. When you've made the withdrawal by giving advice or taking another action, what are practical ways to correct this to gain goodwill again? Or is the withdrawal lost or damaged forever?
Well, I'll go backwards on that one. So nothing is lost or damaged forever when you make a withdrawal. This is just the same as your, the gas tank in your car, if for some reason you're not driving a fully electric car, or a battery that can be recharged, or a bank account that you take money out of. Like, it's fine, you can put more in, and in fact it's probably healthier when you take out and put in and take out and put in, rather than just kind of leave it totally stagnant. So withdrawals are perfectly legal. They're a part of life. It's a good thing. It's no problem. You get tired and then you sleep, right? It's an organic process. It's okay. So once you've made the withdrawal, again, you can minimize the withdrawal by asking for as little inconvenience as possible, right? You respect their time, you respect their boundaries, you consult with them, and so on. And you can make lots of deposits around it. And that's what I put in that slide before about, less withdrawals, more deposits. Show respect, show a lot of respect when you're giving advice, and be very explicit about your care. So showing respect is, you can be considerate of their time, and boundaries are at time. You can consult with them about the issue. You can consult with them about their goals. You can, again, suggest experiments rather than giving orders. These are all ways to both make deposits and make smaller withdrawals.
So, Iran, a few parents are asking about children who've lost their motivation for studying, in particular, who may have shifted their attention to gaming. So a parent says, I've made suggestions to help get them organized for homework, but it just doesn't work. So again, lost motivation for homework, too much gaming. Any suggestions? This is an issue that comes up for so many parents. Yeah. And I know you are not a media expert, so we're not asking you to answer that.
So this is a little different. I'll talk about it happily because I just talk, but this is a little different from advice giving. This is more about really behavior change, and how to go about it. There's a lot of overlap between those two things. The major point of overlap is this idea, again, of the relational bank account, right? Just the higher the amount of goodwill in the relationship, the higher the account balance, the more likely the other person is to do what you ask, basically. And the greater the withdrawal, again, imagine a bank account. Imagine that a relational account goodwill can go from 0 to 100. And then any specific withdrawal also has a certain number of points associated with it based on how inconvenient it is for the other person, right? So let's say you ask me, let's say that you are a great friend of mine and you have 85 points in your account balance right now, and then you ask me to hold my breath forever. It's not going to happen, right? It's just too much. Or maybe you ask me to, please cook and bring you food every day. And I'll do it for 2 days, and then your account balance will reach 0. And then I'll be like, this is not really working for me, right? So, but if you ask me for something really small, if you ask, hey, can you text me every day in the afternoon to remind me to shower, I'll be like, okay. And I can probably do that for a very long time before it's an issue, right? So the size of the withdrawal matters a lot, as well as the amount of goodwill that exists in the relationship. They kind of play off of each other. So people do things that they really love to do, like play video games. And asking them to do less of that is an enormous withdrawal, right? It's a big problem because they love it so much, right? It would be the same as me saying, please don't hang out with this person you love so much, or don't do this thing that you really enjoy, or forever stop eating chickpeas, or whatever it is that does it for you. And so it's gonna be this balance of how do you build lots of goodwill, what are places and opportunities to build goodwill, and how can you make the withdrawal smaller? For example, can you say, if there is some sort of an established pattern, if you sit down and you say, so, son, Chuck, you're playing a lot of video games, and do you feel like that's having any kind of an effect on your schooling? Because I'm a little worried, but I don't know how you see it. So you're starting a dialogue. You're consulting. Chuck says, yeah, maybe a little bit, but it's not a big deal, right? You say, okay, so what do you mean? What do you mean by a little bit? And you're actually asking. You're not Socratically leading them to, forever abstain from video game. You want to know their perspective. Like, well, I guess I'm late with some schoolwork here and there and whatever. So you have this conversation, and then you say, well, I'm a little worried because a few months ago, you're always on time with everything. And then a couple months ago, you started being a little bit late on stuff. And now you're saying that, every week, basically, there's something that's late. And I'm worried, because, and then you articulate your care, right? And all the reasons you want them to succeed from their perspective, right? You're not saying, I'm worried about being embarrassed in front of my friends because you didn't, graduate Stanford when you were 12. You say, I know that, we've been talking a lot about how much you want to be a paleontologist, and, that requires a good deal of studies, and I want to make sure that you're prepared for that. I want to do what I can. And honestly, if this continues down this path, I think it might be a problem. So totally different, right, than being like, you're playing too many video games, off by 5, right? Like, it's a relationship, it's a conversation, it's super respectful. And they might be like, well, I don't know, I really love it. Or they might be like, no, it's not such a big deal. And so you might say, well, how about we see if we can set some limits around it? And now I'm like, time out from the role play. Like, I'm now just talking about, this is how you would treat addiction. And this is not yet addiction, but when you start working on addiction, one prevalent approach is you just start putting some boundaries on it, right? You just learn to exercise some control over it, not immediate. Total, absolute abstention. So you might say something like, okay, so how much video game time do you think is reasonable? They'll be like, I don't know, 16 hours a day. And you're like, well, it's kind of a lot, and you do take bathroom breaks, right? And they're like, yeah, okay. So how much do you think that? And eventually you'll reach some number that's way too high, and they'll say like, I don't know, maybe every day from, basically from the time that school is over until maybe I don't need to go to dinner. I'll just have cereal. So maybe, I don't know, I guess about 5 hours a day. And you're like, okay. Can we arrive at some agreement about taking time out of that? So maybe dinner really is actually very important. Or maybe we only start video games after homework is done. Do you think that's possible? They'll say, no, I can do it after. You know what? Okay. Let's do an experiment for this coming week, right? Let's just see how much homework gets done using your schedule. And this is a win-win, right? Because either they'll be so motivated to show you that they're right that they'll do all their homework, or they won't, but then you can come back a week later and say, okay, we did this experiment, right, that we agreed on, and what's the results? Okay, so what do we do next, right? But you slow way down, now shifting to behavior change hat, right? You slow way down in terms of your expectation of the rate of change. Because slow change is sustainable change, right? So you're not like, stop, down, 32 minutes video games a day, that's it. You start chipping away and you do it consultatively. It must make sense to them, unless you're willing to, again, jeopardize the entire relationship, unplug their Xbox, lock their whatever, you know. But you have to decide, is this worth it? Are you prioritizing relationship and long-term cooperation? Or are you prioritizing, you know, the mission, whatever it is you're trying to achieve? And in my mind, the only thing I'll risk a relationship for is like a severe concern, either safety, that's pretty obvious, severe health problem, or kind of irreparable harm being done. Otherwise, I'd rather take the slow path to changing behavior in the direction I want to maintain the relationship, because it's so much more important, you know, to have the strong connection for everything, so that they come to you when there's a problem, so that you're able to have these conversations and slowly make changes and so on. Wow, I think that's the longest I've ever talked uninterrupted.
So parents, I know a lot of you were struggling with this issue of video game playing, especially during COVID. And I also want to refer you to a wonderful presentation we have on our YouTube library, our video library, by Dr. Bill Stixert and Ned Johnson, The Self-Driven Child, The Science and Sense of Giving Your Kids More Control Over Their Lives. I know Iran is a fan. Bill Stixert is actually the guy who invented the phrase about parents as consultants back in the 80s. I've seen his letter in McCall's magazine. But it's a really great video. It's a great book, and really very helpful in this regard with, really, as Iran says, making your kid a partner in setting limits. Rather than top down, you become partners. Okay, here is a great question, Iran. How do you balance giving deposits and respect to our children while still maintaining our authority as a parent?
Can you say that again, please, Charlene?
Yes. How do you balance giving deposits and respect to our children while still maintaining our authority as a parent?
Okay, story time. So when I was in my early 20s, I had this conversation with a friend of mine. Neither of us were parents at the time, but we ended up talking bizarrely about really what's the source of parental authority. Is it fear? Is it love? Is it respect? Like, what is it exactly? And I felt strongly at the time, the same as I do now, which I guess makes me a flat character based on what I remember from my literature class. I felt strongly that fear never needs to play part of that. I thought that there can be a very strong relationship with very strong discipline based on mutual respect and affection. And it's still clear who's in charge and who gets to call shots. But the reason is that in this case, the child is just, first, has such a strong habit of cooperation that like the default is yes, which again, I realize is fantastical thinking in some situations, but the default is yes, just out of habit. Second is the child is so convinced that really the primary thing the parent cares about is the child, that the child will make affordances when the parent says, look, even in this particular case, this is something that is important for me. It's not going to help your life, except it's going to make life easier for me, and I'm asking for you to do this. But that's important for me. I need to sleep, and so you can't have parties, later than 3 a.m. It just doesn't work. And the child will be like, okay. Or because the child feels safe enough to lose a disagreement, right? Because it doesn't mean that all of the child's needs get ignored from that point forward, and the child has just become powerless in the relationship. What I'm getting at is that I don't see any contradiction between showing a lot of care and a lot of respect and having a lot of authority. I think that they can come into conflict if authority is something that's done through either intimidation or forcing, right? Because you hold the keys, right? So you can cut off the internet or whatever. But I think that authority can absolutely be maintained. You can still be the person that knows more. You can be the person that pays for things. This is all real and legitimate, but changes that you want can still be done through a conversation, consultation, collaboration, until you reach your own red line. And then the red line can also be still can be respectful and caring. Even, if you have a young child who's sporadically violent, or if you have an older child who's like starting to smoke and you really don't want that, or whatever it is, you can even set really clear, strict lines and still be very respectful and very caring, right? I'm doing this because I really believe that blah, 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 right? This is something that I feel about very strongly. It's not a mistake I'm willing to let you make. And you know that I'm willing to let you try and experiment on many, many different things. This is not a thing that I can accept because I think it's so dangerous that it's possible you won't recover. And again, if you have a deep enough history with your child of this kind of conversation, this will be meaningful when you say something like this. So again, I don't see a contradiction between authority and showing a lot of care and respect, but it's, I may be too far gone, like I might have drunk too much of the Kool-Aid, and so that's actually a conversation I would love to have to understand better, because I'm a little worried I'm missing something. So I'm happy for follow-ups. You are muted, Charlene, and I think you're saying important things.
Sorry about that. If you ask this question and you want some more clarification, please feel free to jump into the conversation. We really want this to be a parent forum. And if anybody has more questions, type them into the chat. We're going to keep asking. Here's one, Iran. Let's shift gears just for a minute, okay? Because we've been asking serious questions. But I think this one's a good one too. After having spent so much time together during COVID, I feel like we've run out of things to talk about. Do you have any suggestions for making family interactions, parent-child communication, more fun?
Some, but I don't have the answer. So part of my answer is, of course, don't force it. Relationships ebb and flow. We have friends that we talk with every day for a while, and then we don't for a long time. And, having experiences outside of the relationship is often fodder, things to talk about in the relationship, because we're all gossips, right? Most of what we talk about is stuff that happened with other people. So that's okay. Like, allow the separate time. I'm saying don't be too worried about being able to spend meaningful time together, even on a daily basis. Like, it's okay if you just kind of coexist happily, have some time away, and then you'll have more to talk about when you come together. So my first point is, don't panic. It's okay to not always have lots of fun stuff to do together, and even to have extended periods, as long as everybody's basically okay with each other. Giving space is an art, and very important. So give space and take space when you need it too. So that's one. Actually, you know what? I won't add. I'll stop here, and we can brainstorm together, because in 5 minutes we're going to shift to the after party for people who want to stay. We can brainstorm together, like actual conversation about things to do with the family now that we're all locked in together. But I'll keep it that, just saying, like, don't panic. It's okay if it ebbs and flows. Don't.
Again, in a related question, Iran, a parent asked, my teen seems to want to spend a lot of time by themselves now during the pandemic. Is that okay? Or should I be trying to reach out to them and engage them differently? My sense is that it is okay, that that's a natural teenage thing when we're also together. They're trying to carve out a little space for themselves, but what do you say?
Well, I mean, in general, right, and the legend claims that teens in general want a lot of alone time, pandemic or not, and the pandemic can make it more extreme, right, because we are stuck together. So again, I think as long as everything feels safe, I would start with, right, so the first question is everything safe? Are they doing something very, very weird in their room, or just kind of normal weird? And if it's just basically normal weird, if you're worried about it, you can sit down and have a conversation. Again, I think so many things can be discussed, right? To say, hey, I notice you're spending a lot of time in your room, and we used to hang out more before. I also know that this is a weird set of circumstances we've been living in for the past year. And so I just want to check in. Are you feeling okay? Do you want more time together, less time together? What's going to work for you? And just kind of, that also gives you a sense of where they're at. Like, you can talk about almost anything. And if they prefer more time alone, yeah, do it. That's respecting their boundaries is super important. It's a deposit. Again, you can be explicit about it. You're like, I get the sense that you don't want too much interaction, so I'm just going to slide your food under the door and be gone. And then remember again that crossing a boundary that somebody placed, especially explicitly, that's an enormous withdrawal, right? Enormous. And so unless you have a very good reason to do it, why do it? So it's about tolerating the discomfort that we have, because we want more time with this person that we really like and maybe worry about it. But if they're not into it right now, the shortest path to getting them back into hanging out with us is not forcing ourselves on them. So unless there's a problem, I'd say, so keep inviting, by all means, right? Say, hey, we're all going to hang out if you want. You're really welcome. But be very careful not to turn it into a guilt trip. Like, even in your mind, you need to be very clear that they're invited but not expected, that it's okay if they choose not to, right? Think about, I don't know, whatever exercise you need to do in your head to do that. Imagine that they developed some short-term allergy to the kind of shampoo that you use, and they'll discover when the allergy is over. But in the meantime, they shouldn't come out just and make themselves uncomfortable, right? Or this might have been a little too weird of an analogy, but you get what I'm saying. Like, just convince yourself somehow that it's okay for them to not be there until they want to join, and just leave the door, metaphorically, probably, open, so they can join whenever they want without forcing. It's probably going to happen much sooner than if you start forcing them to join.
So, Leslie, I'm not sure if Iran answered your question, but she's asking a clarification. How do you determine if the amount of seclusion is too much or something to be concerned about?
That's a very good question. I don't know that I have a clear criterion. So I would say, in general, things to watch out for are sharp changes in behavior, or fast changes in behavior. If your child used to hang out with the family all the time and now never does, like very quickly, or is irritable, or you could hear your child talking on the phone or whatever app people use to talk now, and that just stopped, and your child just seems to be staying in the room listening to songs from the Muppet movie over and over and over again. That's a sharp change in behavior, and so that's something to pay more attention to. And again, you can just start by talking with your child and see how that goes, right? And you'll get a sense. If you're worried, I would say in general, as a parent, you have strong instincts. Obviously, you know your child really well. If you realize you're worried, talk to your child about it. See what happens. The reaction is usually going to be very informative, right? They'll either be very defensive and upset about it, and then you'll know something's going on, or they'll explain something in a way that convinces you that everything is fine, or you'll get some weird sense or whatever. But talk to concerns you have about your kids. Kids that are old enough. Well, we talk about teens right now anyway, so they're old enough, right? Talk with them about it. Just say, I'm a little worried. Don't make it a big deal. Just say, I'm a little worried. Here's what I noticed, and you paraphrase the situation you observe, not what they say, right? So you literally say, I noticed that over the past month, you're basically in your room, or going on a walk, then going straight to your room, and the paraphrase stop. You start talking about yourself then, right? And you say, and I'm a little worried. Just it feels like you're just kind of stuck in there, and I don't know if this is feeling good for you, or if you're enjoying it, or what. So I just wanted to check in. How are you feeling? Or whatever, right? So just have the conversation. So to go back to Leslie's question, I would say, if you're feeling concerned, trust your gut, in the sense that talk to your child about it and see what your child says. If there's a sharp change in behavior, probably better reason to be concerned. Maybe check in with somebody else. If you're concerned in general, reach out and talk to other people, anybody. I mean, it could be parents, friends that you have, whatever, just to consult, right, as a friend, or it could be your school, and asked to speak with a counselor from the school or something like that. The nature of crisis, something I learned early on in therapy school. The nature of crisis is that it tries to make your world small, right? You are the one who's responsible for everything. A friend tells you, oh, I'm feeling horrible, but don't tell anyone. That's a sign that there's a crisis, right? If you become the sole everything for somebody, the world is shrinking and all of it is on you. And as soon as you feel that, you want to immediately push out, involve more people, make the circle bigger, make sure you're not the only one responsible for everything. So a version of that is if you're getting worried about your son, talk to people, bounce some ideas, and somebody will tell you, no, that's, exactly what we had for all 3 kids when they were the same age. Or somebody will say, that is kind of strange. I talked to somebody else about that. Right? But if you're worried, basically talk to somebody, starting with your child, respectfully, and then to other people, including professionals at schools or whoever. You have a lot of resources available, which I'm sure actually Karen will want to tell us about.
So parents and everyone online, and a few people are just joining, so maybe they thought it started at 1. We're now going to switch gears. We want to respect the time for those of you who just budgeted this hour, 12 to 1, California, Pacific Standard Time. But we are going to stay online. Iran has agreed to do a kind of an after party. So it's like you were at the podium or at the stage, and we're going to stay on, and he's going to answer more questions for about another 30 minutes. So if you need to go, thank you for joining us today. We will keep video recording, and Iran will stay on with us again for about another 30 minutes. So again, we're now in the after party.
Yeah, so I don't think people have been shy about leaving, but in case you have been and you feel like you're done, then you are. Congratulations. You're free to go. And if you want to hang out for a bit and talk and ask, and we'll do, I hope, more conversation and less just kind of me talking. So now is the time for those who want to stay.
All right. So here's a question from Kelly. This is a good one. This approach sounds like learning your child's love language and the ways that we interact with our teens.
Wow.
What works for some kids won't work with others. Am I on the right path about this?
Yeah, I love that idea. I wonder if there's a tool. There's probably a tool out there, right? Somebody, I'm not going to Google right now because you're going to be able to see that I'm doing it. So I'm not. You're in my hands. But I wonder if there is like a love language for teens tool. That would make a ton of sense. And again, this is stuff you can talk to your child about. You can say, hey, I made you this beautiful cake and I noticed you haven't eaten it. I'm not upset. I'm not saying you need to. I just thought you really like cherry pecan cakes, right? Am I off? And your child will be like, no, you're not off. I'm just going on this extreme self-starvation diet. Or your child might say, no, I really haven't liked pecan since I was 3, and I'm surprised you haven't noticed. Or your child will say, I really appreciate the gesture, but I haven't been hungry, or whatever, right? But you can talk about anything, including how do you know? I wouldn't exactly phrase it like that, but something like, how do you know that I care about you? So you could phrase it as, for example, what kinds of things have I done in the past that made you feel closer? Or how do you know that I'm thinking? Because I think about you a lot, but I don't know if you know that I think about you so much, right? So were there any times when you did know, when it was clear to you that I was thinking, and your son would be like, oh, well, there was that time when you bought me that like special tiger soccer, and I knew that that's not easy to find because I tried. So that was awesome when you did that, right? So you can get hints. You can ask people about their love languages. It's a good idea. Still muted.
I think I'm going to not do that.
Yeah.
I love this comment in this same vein from Sally Iran, who said, as parents, we need to learn our kids' love languages and how they're different from ours so that we can be intentional in how we speak love in their love language. I think that's a nice way of looking at it.
Amen. That's beautiful.
All right. All right, here's a question that's on everybody's mind. I'm just going to say it. I try to be respectful of my children, but they don't listen to me. Why should I listen to them?
Well, trying to think of a nice way to say it. Basically, because somebody has to be the adult in the relationship, right? So, somebody has to be modeling good behavior, and Kids go through phases, but they retain what they see most of the time. And so if you are, I don't know, let's take an extreme example, which I'm sure is not what is happening behind this particular question. But, you know, if your kids don't listen to you and then you start shouting, threatening, and eventually hitting and punishing them, what are they learning? You know, they're learning to obey when you're there, to scare them. When you're not, they'll do whatever they want to do as long as you don't come back and do the same things to them. And when they're in other relationships in their lives, they'll do the same because that's what authority figures do. So when your kids don't listen to you, it'd be nice to think about some specific examples. Let's pick a silly one. You have, like in my home, I ask people to take shoes off when they come in. There's stuff outside and I don't want the stuff inside. And so I asked to take shoes off. Let's say that, you know, my child were to come in and refuse to take his shoes off and run around the house and just be horrible. And then my son would say, hey, Daddy, can you make me a sandwich? And I would say like, no, I cannot, because you took your, I don't know if that's helpful. That just feels like conflict. And that just feels like, you know, I'm like imposing sanctions. It's a trade war with my son. Now, if I'm busy going around the house cleaning all of the mud tracks, and this is why I can't make the sandwich, that's legitimate. I'd be like, I would love to make the sandwich, but I'm busy cleaning up the mud right now. Do you want to help me with the mud? And then we can make the sandwich, something like that. Maybe that's more reasonable.
So, Eran, how about if we reframe it? This is a good question from Joe.
Yeah.
And several parents have responded to it. How do you listen and handle advice from our kids, even though we don't agree with them? How do we listen and handle advice from our kids,
Yes.
even though we don't agree with them?
Yes, I love that. So, and thank you for cutting me off on what might have been a downward spiral.
Sorry about that.
No, that's a rescue. I'll take it. Is Joe available to talk with? Because this feels like a good. Plus, you know, we're in the after party now, so I'd love for people to be talking. But like, I'm wondering what kind of advice, what level of advice we're thinking about.
Joe.
Hi, Iran.
Yeah.
Oh, hello.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
So I put the scenario is we are trying to kind of like give advice to my younger son about screen time limit because he do too much gaming. And my older teen was listening to this advice that we're giving, and she said, no, this is so unfair and unrealistic. Why you think he should be doing what you told him to do? So she's trying to parent us on how to handle the kids in this case. So she's trying to get advice, and we're not sure how to handle it. Should we try to model what you just said, or should we ignore what she said? Is that you're not a parent? How will you know?
So just to flesh it out a little more, can you say the ages of the two kids?
The older one is 16. The younger one is about 13, almost
Okay.
13.
So you're sitting there telling your 13-year-old maybe less screen time, and then your 16-year-old chimes in, pipes up, says, no, it doesn't need to be less screen time. That's not realistic. That's not right. There should be a lot of screen time. Is that essentially it?
Yes, she said, just let him do whatever he wants. Because this is how we handle the older one, because she's more disciplined. She's not really into gaming. So she seems to have a better handle. So we kind of give her a little bit free ride on what she wants to do.
Yeah.
Because she's getting older, more mature, but this is not the same case with the younger one.
Yeah.
So
Go ahead.
yes, so she's seeing that we're treating those the two kids differently. So that's why she mentioned that we're being unfair.
Yes. So you're saying you think that your 16-year-old is essentially projecting her mind onto the 13-year-old and saying, look, you don't need to restrict my sibling because I wouldn't need to be restricted and I'd still be fine. So why restrict?
Yes.
Sally, what do you think? Oh, VNA. I don't know. Is that how you pronounce your name? VNA? Go.
Go for it.
Sometimes I do have.
Louder.
Okay.
Microphone to mouth.
Now I'm much better. 17 boy, 11 girl. And I do have situations like this. So when sometimes it comes, I actually kind of tried a couple of times. It did work, suggestion. I gave them Nicholas, the older one, 17. Okay, so how would you help me to teach the younger one? And surprisingly enough, he did give me a good plan. And he actually ended up, he took me away. He ended up supervising, helping the sister to get better.
So you had
what
to have,
happened with me.
your older child was like an intern parent?
Can you repeat?
Like your older child was like a parent intern?
A little bit, I think so.
And
what happened was he came to do the same thing, but then what happens was I didn't feel that he was being clear about the situation. Said no, and then I told him. So then, how would you want it to do? How do you want me to tell her to change what is going on right now? And then he got in and he actually showed me different ways to do it. So at that point, I mean, it hasn't happened, but that point was an opportunity that goes in sync with what we are talking in here and did help. So each case is a different case, but that's what happened with me as I hear Joe, and I felt a little bit of parallel.
Joe, how does this connect with your situation? Because I think you were saying that your older child didn't see a reason to impose limits, right? Whereas I think in Vienna's situation,
I think there's also a hidden agenda, because sometimes when we do certain thing to the younger one, we try to do the same thing to the older one. So she's felt that she's being shortchanged. So she reworded that when we start doing certain thing to the younger one, and then the younger one say, it's not fair. Why she get to use the screen, or why she get to watch TV whenever she wants? And I need to ask you for the passcode to the TV.
Yeah, so your older child may be worried about cascading restrictions, right? You're imposing limits on my neighboring country, and soon enough you'll invade me as well.
Yes.
Bethany, you had something to share?
I don't have advice per se, but just wanted to note that the theme of injustice is very strong with my tween. And so it might be like two separate pieces, and where one is a conversation with the older one about injustice, and then separately from that is the piece about the screen time for the younger one.
So are you saying, Bethany, to separate the issue, have a separate conversation, or at least try to like parcel out the question of, is it or is it not a good idea to have limits on screen time for the younger sibling? Are you saying that should be one conversation, another, is it fair or not?
I'm just saying that my older one, who's only a tween, so I'm only this far on the journey, is triggered by injustice. And so, and in any situation, right? And so the person was asking, should they be allowed to be a mini parent or be a part of the parenting team? And I'm just putting a lens over the question. That, yeah, I don't know that it creates like a path, like a set of actions. It's just something that's been helpful for me when my older one is acting out or falling apart or whatever.
So how to make it concrete, right? So I have, you're in the room with me and the other me. I'm 16 and he's 13. and you say, 13, Iran, I think we should restrict your screen time. And then 16-year-old Iran says, that's totally unfair, you know, that's unnecessary and unfair. What do you then say?
Well, I would divide and conquer. So I would be like, I'm hearing that you think that's unfair. Let's talk about that in a minute. Or I would do like peace council. If we're going to have a round table about it, you know, then let's make sure everyone's voice is at the table and my voice counts too. So, and maybe it depends on the family dynamics if everybody's voice gets an equal part of the vote, but then it would be, what does everyone in the whole family think is an appropriate amount of time? And then why? And then why is that not an option? And that kind of thing.
Yeah, okay.
Do you have a peace council at your house? I love that. Do you really do that?
Yeah, sort of. I have a friend whose kids went to like a Montessori school, and she modeled that one time. And I also did some meditation classes with a guy who talked about when your kids are fighting, if you can just go sit in between them and quietly, that it can have like a profound effect on the tension, rather than like with words going in and trying to, you know, fix it or make them behave or whatever. So both of those things, I mean, yeah, do I regularly do that? No, like, you know, but sometimes.
Those are all very thought-provoking. Inspiring maybe is a better word. I wonder, Joe, also something that, Bethany, something you said now that Joe makes me think might apply to your situation, Joe, is the question of why is it necessary? And the fact that, you know, there's a question of equity versus equality and all of that, right? Is it about everybody only has 3 hours or 30 minutes or whatever? Or is it about everybody needs to do all of their homework? And once you do that, you know, but there's homework and there's, you know, some physical activity and there's family time and there's friends. But once all of that is done, fill up the rest with whatever you want. And it may be that, you know, different members of the family, you know, move at different speeds, right? So it could be the fact that, let's say that doing 100% of homework is non-negotiable. Maybe that's the rule in your home. So you could say, okay, for Betty to do 100% of her homework, she can have no more than an hour of screen time a day. It's just empirically, this is how it turns out to be, right? But for Lucy, you know, she can do it with 2 hours. And if Betty wants to work up to 2 hours too, that's fine. We can run the experiments, you know, every month. We can try it for a few days and see if Betty has managed to move along faster so she can have more screen time. Like, that's okay. What I like about this is that it makes rules not arbitrary, right? There's a reason that you're placing limits. It's in order to do other things. It's in service of a yes. That's one. And the other is that in this particular example, screen time is not a reward for doing homework. You're absolutely allowed to have screen time as long as you do everything else, right? And if you can do everything else well and fast, you'll get more. That's fine. But it's not like I'm handing you chips for, you know, food pallets for doing it. It's just you can, right? But the other things come first. But it also ends up being this perfect reward system, right? Where you still get it. Joe, how much does all this connect with what you were asking before? Assuming you're still here.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we can try and see whether it will work. But like, I think the other parent mentioned about injustice. I think another thing is the younger one feels that we are not being fair to him also, because we let the older one have more screen time. So a lot of time, I think he is trying to push the envelope. So that's why it's very hard right now, because he's watching what we're doing to the older one.
Yes, yes. So I think in that case, I'm going to double down on what I said before about this idea of equity versus equality. and working with your child to use the right criterion when comparing between the two siblings, right? So rather than say how much screen time, say how much chore time, or how much homework gets submitted on time, or whatever it is. And it may be that even that is not supposed to be the same time. Maybe, they're pretty close in age, so maybe they equally split chores, for example. If it were a really young child and an older child, I've seen that, right? Where the 12-year-old is like, well, the 30-year-old doesn't have to wash any dishes or whatever. Like, well, yeah, 30-year-old can't, but is putting in appropriate effort, right? But learning to compare different things than the things that child immediately cares about, like screen time. You're like, screen time can be done as long as these other things get done, and these things need to be equal, right? And once this happens, this is up to you. That's fine. Something like that is how I'm thinking about it. So again, thinking about the reason why the rule is in place, other than because no more than 2 hours. Like, why not more than 2 hours, really? What are the other options? What are the things to do? Something like that.
So, Iran, here's a question that has been in the box. I want to get to it.
Yeah.
It's about emotion in dealing with your kids. So here's things maybe have gone off the rails a little bit. This parent asks, is it not helpful if an adult starts crying in the conversation and saying how sad it makes them, or asking the teen why they're so mad at me? I know when my kids were teens or younger, I would sometimes just say, I'm going to give myself a timeout. I can't deal with this right now. So what happens if you as a parent just kind of emotionally lose it? Do you express that to your child, do you suggest?
So this is about, in this question, it was about when I as a parent feel upset
enough that you start crying in a conversation with your teen, say.
and upset about something that my child did to me.
I think that the teen is angry and they are having difficulty answering whatever the issue is.
All right. So, as usual, I have a couple of thoughts, and they might be a little different from stuff that I've said so far. I think that kids in general, one of the main themes of being a kid is asserting control over oneself, right? Body, time, priorities, values, whatever it is. And there's a lot of exploration that goes on in different intensities in different ages. One of the things that gives us the most sense of power, which is what many of us lack as children and often as adults too, but one of the things that gives us the most sense of power is being able to get other people to do things. Right? That's maybe one of the definitions of power. And if I can make you upset, I have tremendous power over you. Tremendous power. Which is why, especially with younger kids, with a younger child, I would say that's kind of a no-brainer. With a younger child, you don't want to be, ideally, and you certainly don't want to show that you are negatively affected, like hurt by what they do, right? You're kind of neutral about the stuff that you don't like. You're active about it. You're redirecting, doing whatever you need, but neutrally. And you are elated when they're doing the right stuff. So they can control you only by doing the right things, right? That's kind of a strict, again, behavior modification approach. Because when you have an emotion as a result of something that your child did, especially a young child, it's an enormous reinforcer for whatever they were doing, right? So you just don't have a reaction when they do stuff you don't like, and you manage it. And then you have an enormous reaction when they do stuff that you do like. So with older kids, I think that's still a consideration to keep in mind. Like, to what extent is this going to make the child feel strong in the relationship? If I get visibly hurt, you can talk about being hurt. It's different from, showing being very hurt. So that's one consideration. I'm not saying it's the only one, but something to think about, right? How much power is this giving them? And to what extent might this actually reinforce their behavior? This depends a lot on the child, their relationship with the child. That's one. Two is to what extent is your strong emotion going to be very upsetting for them in a sense that it makes them feel just less safe, right? Because for a lot of kids, their parents are kind of the solid, strong people. And when we see the cracks, it's terrifying when this first happens, right? And that usually happens, you know, somewhere between, I don't know, 15 and 35 that we completely, well, 15 and 25, that we totally get that our parents are like real people with serious, you know, human problems, and they stop being gods. And I spoke recently with a guy who I think is in his 60s now, and he was telling me about this process too. And he was saying how when he was little, his dad was like, you know, all important. And then he grew up and his dad became this big idiot. And now that he's in his 60s, he's like, my dad's a genius. He's back there. He gets it again. But so getting very upset in front of your children might be very distressing for them. Not in the same way that touching a hot stove is distressing, then you never do it again. You know, it just actually may feel like the world is less stable and safe if you are crumbling in front of them. And this is the hardest piece to talk about, and I don't quite know how to do it diplomatically, but you want to be very careful not to manipulate your kids with your negative emotion, right? Not to make them feel sorry for you. You know, so when a young child or even an older child hits another child, and you say, how do you think that makes them feel, and things like that, like that's a good idea, right? That's helpful, and you develop empathy and all of that. I think it's trickier when it's your kid and you about an issue that's not just like, it's not that your child accidentally dropped, you know, some heavy piece of machinery on your foot. Like that hurts and that's easy. But if your child is acting in a way that's upsetting for you, and then you get really upset about this, and if any part of that is about you trying to make your child not do that through this kind of emotional pressure, I think that's really problematic. Because you also don't get to resolve the issue, right? It becomes a form of taboo, right? It becomes a fear point for everybody. You then learn that these kinds of things can't be actually negotiated and discussed. So it creates a little bit of a communication black hole, or not a black hole, the opposite of that. I don't know, it's a taboo. It doesn't suck communication in, it just can't go there. And I think that's a problem. So I think if you have genuine emotion, have it, right? If you're actually upset, you don't need to pretend like you're not. I think it is a good idea not to show, like in some of all of these three buckets that I was saying, I think it's a good idea not to show like the full extent of your actual big upset. I think if you can talk about your upset, that's a good idea. I think if you need to step away, that's a good idea. Usually we don't make our best decisions or, you know, apply our best communication anyway when we're super upset. So something happens in real time, I get super upset, I might say, this is really upsetting for me. I need to go for a little bit, I'll come back and we'll talk about it some more. You immediately say, I'll come back, right? You're not abandoning, it's not dangerous, right? But I'm gonna go for a little bit, I need to process this. This is very upsetting for you. Maybe you're tearing up already, or whatever is actually happening for you, that's okay. You say, you know, I want to come back when I'm calmer and we can talk about this. And this is good modeling too, right? And then you go and do that. I think that's preferable to like having an actual meltdown in front of your child, because, again, to summarize these three things, because I think having a big meltdown might mean your child will change his or her behavior because of a sense of emotional pressure, which is not the reason you want the behavior to change. Because a meltdown might make your child feel actually less safe, because now there's less of, you know, the strong person protecting. And because it actually could potentially reinforce that behavior that your child was doing, because you're able to pull your strings, push your buttons so deeply, right? So absolutely have emotions, but I would say don't show giant negative emotions to your kids if you can avoid it. Honestly, ideally not to anyone. I think this is just kind of a general idea. Good practice, right? Verbalize, but try to have your freakouts privately.
Thank you, Iran. Really good advice. And some of us are in California. Just want to point out, Iran is actually in Connecticut. So it got dark in between when we started and now.
Oh,
So that's why he's in the dark. Before we wrap, there's a few people have been asking a question, and I really want to hear what you have to say, Eran. This is really about the relational bank account as a two-way street. So here we go. Question from Bhavini that a few others have echoed. How do you teach a teen or young adult who makes lots of withdrawals from you and doesn't think about the need to make deposits to replenish the balance? That is, I'd like them to voluntarily think about replenishing the relational bank account between the child and the parent.
Well, teaching telepathy is very hard. We do this on our second course, but no, I'm kidding. So teaching telepathy is very hard. Like many things, I think this is something that's good to talk about, depending on the age of the child, but can be presented in an age-appropriate way to almost any age. Anyway, lots of examples. I'll give them if you want, but I think it's good to talk about. I think it's good to say, look, you know, I would really appreciate it if you could also help me with this. And not only I would appreciate it grumpily, I would actually more cheerfully do things. You can sit down and go, again, depending on the age of the child, you can talk about this notion of the relational bank account. I've had families participate in classes, which was amazing, with some young teens. Talk about it with parents and just kind of everybody gets it. It's wonderful. So I think talking about it rather than hoping that they will spontaneously come up with it. At the same time, just to be realistic, this is not going to be an equal relationship ever. Right? You're giving more, materially anyway. You're giving more than you're receiving. It's just, you know, as far as I know, a fact of life. It's not going to change for a long time.
Yeah.
So I don't know how helpful this was. This may have been a little bit pessimistic, but that's how I think about it. Basically, if you want them to make more deposits, if you're feeling like you're getting drained, talk about it before it gets to be an enormous issue. Actually, I have a little more to say about that. Sorry. So if part of it is that you're feeling like you're getting really drained relationally, it's a good idea to talk about it. First of all, with somebody else, just to do a reality check, you know, because maybe they're just being kids and there's no way around it. But if it's something that you think could be changed by talking with them, talk about it with them. The other thing is, if you're getting very drained, it may also be the case that you're not doing enough self-care, basically, right? Maybe you need more time to do your things, the things that charge you up and make you feel better, right? That's very important, because when we're generally depleted, then everybody's a jerk. These are the two things I would suggest. Yeah, talk with three things. Talk with friends and see, you know, about how you're feeling. Just kind of see what they have to say about it. Talk with your child if you feel it's appropriate, and think carefully about whether it would make more sense for you to do more self-care. Do you feel like everybody's kind of annoying and asking for too much? You know, do you feel like there's just everybody's asking for, you know, too much of your energy because you don't have enough? So maybe what would be helpful to work on is having more energy by doing things that energize you, which is what I think about when I think self-care. That's my three-part answer.
Well, thank you, Eran. So we are going to, well, before we wrap, I'm going to ask Eran for some last words, but I really want to thank all of you who joined us today and participated and stayed with us for the after party. Hope you'll take a minute to fill in the survey. And I forgot to mention, and my son will be so unhappy if I don't, that we have a new tool coming. The Parent Venture, our nonprofit organization, has created an app called Keys for Parenting. And literally it's a keyboard that'll be on your phone with advice written by my partner, Bev Hartman, and I to help you through these tough moments of communication. So we hope you get a chance to join that wait list. We're going to launch in January. I hope you sign up for Eran's classes. He's generously offered to give them even if you can't afford it. Let him know. If you can, great. But please do fill out the survey. We thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. Big kudos to Karen Lee and the Sequoia Healthcare District for initiating this parent forum, English and Spanish. So Eran, some final words, and then we're going to close for the day.
Thank you very much, everybody, for joining. I hope you have a very, very nice Friday, you took, a big chunk out of it to invest in your relationship with your kids, really. So, kudos to you. And I hope that you take a few minutes to do something extra nice just for yourselves today, because you earn it every day.
Okay, thank you, Eran. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Take care. Happy Friday. Happy holidays. See you soon.